All right, welcome in. Just Dubs, John Dickinson, Greg Silver. We're back at it. And why are we back at it? Well, we're back at it because finally some news as far as a Lauri Markkanen result. And it's not a favorable one for the Golden State Warriors. Greg wearing it all over his facial expressions. Greg, good to be with you, man. I know you've had a little time off. I've had a little time off. Been filling in all over the place over the air at KNBR, and really our first opportunity to chat in this setting since free agency and things had started to die down a little bit, and really all eyes started to shift toward Lauri Markkanen really for the last 3-4 weeks. But good to be with you, man, and we'll get into all of that here on this episode.
Yeah, it's been fun little paths that we're on right now. You're a big morning show star for the time being with Dieter Kurtenbach. I've gotten some good extra innings shows with Bill Lasky in. I just went to Oregon for a nice little wedding on a ranch. It was fantastic. Best wedding buffet I've ever had in my life. Going to be really tough to top that. But now I'm back and attempting to get my life together again, as the Warriors are too, as they can continue through this offseason. It's I've been skeptical about the Markkanen thing, like since it was floated out there in April, but now it's official, and you're kind of looking at this roster of this is probably going to be the training camp roster.
Yeah, it's looking that way because once you get into the middle of August and really the end of August and September, that is the dead zone in terms of the NBA offseason. That's when basically everybody in the NBA, especially after the Olympics are done here within the next week as we record this on Tuesday, everybody going to be going on vacation really up until the couple of weeks before training camp, which will begin, I believe it begins October 1st this year, training camp and media day for a bunch of teams on September 30th, at least the teams that are going to be starting on time and don't have any overseas trips or anything like that planned. So I'm with you. Yeah. And the news of the day leading us to that path came from The Athletic via Shams and Tony Jones and Anthony Slater, all contributing to a report that dropped this morning. And it was not unexpected at this point. Greg, Lauri Markkanen and the Jazz expected to agree to a contract extension, a long-term extension, and sign it tomorrow, Wednesday the 7th or later. And again, the Warriors and Jazz, a little bit of deadline pressure, needed to get a deal done before Markkanen signed this contract extension with the Jazz, because the moment at which he signed the contract extension with the Jazz, it meant an immediate 6-month no trade period. And the reason today was relevant, just for everybody that didn't know, was today, August 6th, as we record this, is 6 months to the day of the trade deadline in the NBA. So if the deal had been done today, Markkanen could be traded at the trade deadline, but would have been off the table for the Warriors to acquire in the offseason. If he does it at any point beginning tomorrow, he will essentially have a 1-year no trade clause. And the reporting from The Athletic is, in fact, that is what the Jazz and Markkanen are going to do. So long story short, Greg, no Lauri Markkanen for the Warriors, and back to the drawing board, I guess. But to your point, it's looking more and more like they're going to go into the year improved in terms of the bench and some of the role players, but failing in finding their number two around Stephen Curry, which I think is big time problematic as they try to vault themselves up in the Western Conference.
Well, yeah, I'm going to reiterate one point that I made when I had the privilege of doing the Silver and Silver show, filling in for Papa and Lund, which was a great time. And I don't know if you ended up hearing this clip or not, but the issue I take with the Warriors roster right now is not that they're necessarily a much worse, if at all, team than they were at the end of last season. In addition to not solving the second star problem, which is the big glaring problem, my issue is you have the same problem that you did last year, where it's you have all this quote unquote depth, meaning you have capable role players who can crack a rotation. But what is that going to do in terms of everybody figuring out their roles? And look, with Moses Moody, I'll use him as a good example for this. I'm someone that thinks, the idea of Moses Moody can be a lot more appealing than how he actually plays sometimes. But to his credit, he's also shown up a lot of times and made the most of his minutes, and he's done it in the postseason. That has been on display. And so for somebody like that, I'm looking at this current roster with Brandin Podziemski and D'Anthony Melton and Buddy Hield, and I'm thinking, well, for someone like Moses Moody, you got to make a decision one way or another. Like, is he going to be a part of your rotation, or is he going to be someone that you trade and find another home for? Because I think they're just kind of caught in this similar limbo of having 12 players that are very capable to crack an NBA rotation, no consistent second star. Draymond Green is not going to provide offense in the form of scoring, so you can't have it be just Steph Curry. And let's be honest, like you and Dieter talked about this morning, this team without Steph, not a competitive team in a loaded Western Conference. They are not a competitive team.
No, and the Warriors got away with that last year because Steph Curry played 70 plus games. And so that, that allowed for them to maximize the best version of themselves in some ways, especially once they figured out their rotation in the second half of the season that led them to win 46 games. So I want to get into, and it was trending in this way in the for the last week, really couple of weeks, but it's interesting because it does look now as if the Jazz they wanted Podziemski and the Warriors were not going to include Podziemski. And you can make a case as to whether, the Warriors valued what, the market was for Lauri Markkanen, and per the Athletic in the report that I referenced here at the top, the Warriors had the most aggressive offer, but that offer was still Moses Moody, multiple first-round picks, pick swaps, and second rounders. Again, Utah wanted Podziemski, but the Warriors wouldn't include Podziemski in the deal. And so, this thing really didn't come close to fruition because the Warriors weren't going to do that. And again, I think it's similar to what happened with Klay Thompson in that the Warriors assessed the market well, but having the best offer doesn't mean you're going to get the deal done. Like it, and my guy Dieter said this, it's not an auction. Just because you come in with the best bid doesn't mean that you're going to be sold the product. I think the Warriors kind of got caught really for the second time this offseason, having a very logical assessment, but also coming up short because logic prevailed over maybe an aggressiveness that needed to be there. And look, I get it. The Warriors are looking at the Jazz like you guys are asking for way too freaking much, especially compared to what else is out there for you. But the Jazz were saying, well, that's fine. We have a high standard for it. If you're not going to meet it, then no deal. They ultimately had the leverage in that. Now we'll see. It could burn the Jazz down the line because there's also reports indicating that they still intend to be a very bad team. I don't know how the hell they're going to do that after they sign Lauri Markkanen to a big time contract. I mean, they've been able to do it the last couple of years by shutting him down at the trade deadline, and maybe they end up trading him a year from now. But it's going to be a year from now, at least according to the reporting. So I understand it from both sides. I also, as we talked about on our last podcast a couple of weeks ago, Greg, I understand the Warriors' unwillingness to move Podziemski, but at the end of the day, you have to value and do the value assessment on whether it would have been worth giving him up to get that second player for Steph.
Yeah, I got a few things off of this. One, on the note of it's not an auction, that's a great point, right? Like Utah was not actively looking to get rid of Lauri Markkanen and get a big package in return. They were just open to listening. There's a big difference between willing to trade and wanting to trade. I think the Warriors probably are closer to wanting to trade Andrew Wiggins, but he doesn't have a lot of value, whereas the Jazz were just willing to. So it was already going to be a big package. The Jazz and Danny Ainge know that the Warriors rather are a little bit more desperate because they got a ticking clock with the best player that's ever walked through the doors of their franchise. This is just an opinion. It's not a report or anything, and maybe we'll get some more information on this. I do not believe that just adding Podziemski to the deal of Moody and the picks and the swaps was going to be enough to just seal a deal for the Lauri Markkanen trade. I think if for some reason that answer is yes, then we're having a different conversation. But I am not sitting here like, oh, well, all they had to do was throw in Podziemski and boom, it happens. I don't know if you have a differing view on that one, but then, and then the last thing with it is just, look, as much as I'm in the camp of win now and try to give Steph some support, I do think there was a line at which this would have been excessive. And if you're getting rid of Kuminga, Podziemski, Moody, and picks and swaps, I'm sorry, that's too much for a player that wasn't all NBA.
Well, and look, I've said this. I think giving up Podziemski and Kuminga both would have been way too much. I mean, it goes back to, and I've said this. I think the Warriors believing that they could get a deal done with Moody and picks, to me, was ridiculous. I think the Jazz wanting Podziemski and potentially Kuminga, although I think as time went on, the Warriors became more comfortable moving Kuminga, but the Jazz weren't interested in Kuminga. I think the Jazz made a point to say, no, we want Podziemski over Kuminga. And I think the reason for that was the contract extension that Kuminga is due. And I think the Jazz said, well, no, we're going to trade, or we're going to sign Lauri Markkanen to a big time deal and potentially trade him down the line if it's going to be a situation where we're going to have to pay somebody a large amount of money. So I think
right, because the appeal of Podziemski is you can keep him and he's a good piece for the future, but you don't have to pay him.
And cheaper. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think both sides were irrational in some ways. But the Jazz have Markkanen, and they're willing to pay him, and Markkanen wants to stay there. And so, again, according to the reporting today, that's what's going to happen, and he'll remain a member of the Jazz for another year. As far as, I do also think the other part of it was, I think the Warriors' willingness to include Kuminga or even Podziemski, it also relates to, I go back to what The Athletic reported as far as Moses Moody, multiple firsts, pick swaps, and second rounders. And I think, if Utah wanted Podziemski, the Warriors valued Podziemski as, hey, if we throw him in, then that's going to take away a first rounder. And it's going to take away maybe a first rounder and a pick swap, or a first rounder and, a couple of second rounder. I think if the Jazz wanted it all, and I think the Warriors viewed it as, no, if we give you Kuminga, well, Kuminga is actually worth maybe more than a first round pick, right? And Podziemski maybe is worth more than a first round pick. So if those players who are ready to go now, and at least in the Warriors' eyes, have a pretty high ceiling, we know what they think of Kuminga, and I think they have told us here in the last month what they think of Podziemski as far as his value, then I think that's where this became a misfit as well. And I think what happens is the Warriors do overvalue their young players. And I had the rant about Kuminga as it related to the Paul George deal. I think the rest of the league doesn't see the Warriors' young players as great as the Warriors do. And even though the Warriors have not to this point been able to fully maximize roles for some of those young players. So, in a sense, it's like, hey, we think Kuminga is a future potential superstar. We think Podziemski is a future potential all-star. The rest of the league is like, well, no, we disagree with that. So we're not going to give X, Y, or Z for those players without other assets being attached to the deal as part of it. And that's where the Warriors are like, no. You're getting a future all-star or potential future superstar. Some of this other stuff isn't going to be included. I think the Warriors either wanted to part with the established guys and not the future in terms of picks after Steph. I think the Jazz are like, no, we want both of it or it's not going to happen. And that's where we sit as far as it not happening. But there is a disconnect, Greg, between the way the Warriors view their own guys, and I think the way the rest of the league views the Warriors guys.
Well, yeah, and I think because of that, JD, we're going to see a shift in little bit of the internet circle. Not that that's really worth taking all that seriously sometimes. And we're going to see a little bit shift in kind of fan voices and feelings about how some of these players are perceived, whether it's fair or not. I mean, listen, if this is mostly the roster that they're going to roll with into the next season, they're going to realize you have a 36 going on 37-year-old Steph Curry. And I think, we could probably do a whole segment on this at some point, the pressure meter for individual players. I think Jonathan Kuminga is now going to have the expectation of being a number 2 on a low-end playoff team. Brandin Podziemski will have the expectation of being a glue guy and then some, justifying him staying with the roster. Andrew Wiggins should have a chunk of pressure, although who knows what people are really thinking on him and if they've just kind of given up on expectations. But he should have pressure to get at least somewhat closer back to 2022 version of him. And then Draymond Green is going to have the pressure of not getting ejected and being available for his team. And it's going to be a long list where there's a sense of fragility that I think has not really permeated the organization up until really this last year.
Well, and I let's run through a couple of these guys individually, because I think Kuminga in this whole thing actually, from a personal standpoint, made out pretty well, in that Podziemski became such a focal point, and the Jazz lack of interest in Kuminga and hyper interest really in Podziemski. I think that is good for Kuminga, because I don't think anybody in the fan base is going to look at it like, well, if the Warriors had just been willing to throw Kuminga in the deal would have got done. I don't think that's the case. I think that's pretty clear. So Podziemski, though, and you've been all over this, I think the way that things were reported, Podziemski is going to have a little bit of a target on him from some in the Warrior fan base, because I think he's going to be cast almost as the guy that could have gotten the deal done had the Warriors just included him. And so if Podziemski isn't this or that next year and the Warriors disappoint in certain ways, I do think the fan base is going to really, I think in many ways, turn on him. And I think at times we saw, he was the one guy that was playing a lot among the young guys that people are like, why the hell is he playing a lot and not Kuminga at different points or not Moody at different points? And I think the numbers and the analytics and all that showed, and even the eye test, like if you were watching the games, like Podziemski impacted winning in a lot of different ways, more consistently for greater percentage of the time he was on the court compared to Moody, and more consistently throughout the 82 game season than Kuminga, although Kuminga was really impactful toward winning in the second half, at least in the regular season.
And
games.
he became he became the second offensive scorer that the Warriors severely lacked.
Correct. So I think, but Podziemski's the guy that I think a lot of people are going to say, well, damn it, if the Warriors could have had Markkanen, would have had Markkanen if they had just thrown him in, and they didn't. They didn't do it. So I think there is going to be an interesting shift there if he doesn't perform at a certain level, and or if this team doesn't perform at a certain level, early on next year.
Well, to revisit the point I made about 10, 15 minutes ago with saying, I personally am skeptical if it was throw Podziemski in that Moody and Picks proposal and you have a deal. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but what's your temperature on that?
Yeah, I the sense I get is it wasn't as simple as that. The sense I get is if Podziemski had been in, if Podziemski had been in, I don't think the Warriors were going to do multiple firsts and pick swaps and second rounders. Again, if it was 2 firsts, 2 pick swaps, and second rounders without Podziemski in it, I think if Podziemski was in it, the Warriors probably would have wanted to take a first away and a pick swap away, and maybe even one of the second rounders away of the multiple second rounders, or at least 2 of the 3. I think the Warriors would have said, no, Podziemski's worth at least a first round pick and a second round pick. Again, I think the Warriors' evaluation of Podziemski and belief in his value at the price point, and I think the price point is key here. I think the Warriors believe that he probably is worth 2 first-round picks, in terms of what would come off the deal, or a pick and a pick swap and something like that, especially if you're talking about, picks that it also depends on, what the protections would have been and things like that. I think you could have had maybe more protected picks, essentially if the Warriors were good, the Jazz, good enough, the Jazz could have got those picks, but not really made hay in a post-Steph Curry world where the Warriors are among the worst teams in the league. And I think they would have used Podziemski's value in their mind to try and increase those protections and or take picks off the board. I really like, they just were not going to put Podziemski in and have this haul of picks with a majority of them being, at least some of them, because if you're talking about 2 picks and multiple pick swaps, I mean, we're talking post Steph at that point, because the Warriors still have a pick that's held up, down the line that they're going to have to deal with. So, the short answer is I don't think throwing Podziemski in would have got it done, because the Warriors at that point would have wanted to take other stuff out of the deal. And I think at that point, the Jazz still would have balked.
One thing I'm really curious about is if this version of the Warriors fan base and how big Twitter and social media and the internet and all that are right now, if that was back in around 2012 when there was the do they trade Klay Thompson for Kevin Love discussions going on, I wonder what the temperature would have been on that. And they obviously made the right decision. And this is not saying Podziemski is going to be Klay, or they are making the right decision. I mean, time will tell, right? But it is interesting how it's the clamor to win now, but sometimes it does pay to invest in your player development. I think what is the key difference right now, though, is that you got only 2, 3, maybe 4, if you're lucky, years of Steph Curry left playing at a really high level. And Steph, can he be the one on a championship contending team? I mean, that's a little bit of a maybe question depending on who his surrounding roster is, but I think the answer is probably no when you look at 2 years down the line. So then you're looking at, okay, well, is Podziemski a future all-star? Is Kuminga set to be the new number 1 for this team? And it seems like, based on the Warriors front office and just kind of how they've gone about the offseason, they evaluate their young talent really highly. And then, to your point that you brought up a couple of times here on this episode, I don't think the rest of the league quite sees it that way. And we're going to have to see how the revisionist history shakes out of this in the next 3 to 5 years or so, because this is a really pivotal time with some of these decisions they're making.
Well, and that sets up, where do the Warriors go from here, and what do they have right now, and where do they go from here? Look, I've been pretty clear. I like the DeAnthony Melton signing. I like their ability to get Kyle Anderson. I like the addition of Buddy Hield from the standpoint of you need shooting if you're going to lose Klay Thompson. They do now have a starting lineup. I view it as Steph, Podziemski, Wiggins right now. I still think Kuminga and Draymond are at, Kuminga at the 4, Draymond at the 5 is the better way to go in the regular season. That being said, they liked Trace Jackson-Davis at the 5 and Draymond at the 4 when Kuminga was out. I think the first big decision for the Warriors, as you look at the roster, and we'll get into some of the names that were mentioned, we'll get into some of the names that were mentioned that the Warriors are not going to have interest in, and kind of find a pathway for what the Warriors do here moving forward. But I think, as far as, I've said it, and I'll just put it on record here. I think you can make the case that the Warriors on paper are better, but I don't think that translates into their winning more than 46 games. Like I just because I don't think Steph's going to be as healthy. For as many things that you're kind of counting on going well, there will be unforeseen things that won't go well, right? Draymond doesn't get a suspension for a fight or an altercation with an official, but he gets injured a little bit more. Or Steph, instead of 70 72 games, it's 62 games, or even 65 games, and that adds up to you're not going to win as many games as, and the other part is the Warriors have just shown that they're not going to be buttoned up enough early enough in the season to maximize a regular season. Like they've just shown it. And so, are they better equipped with maybe more structured roles? I think on paper, they are pretty equipped to have more structured roles. But to your point, Steve Kerr, and this is where I will, I will go in a little bit on Steve. He's taken too long to figure out the right roles for everybody these last 2 years. That's just reality. Eventually he's done it. And I haven't necessarily disagreed with the process, or some of the individual decisions made on certain players playing versus not playing. But the reality is it's taken too long to figure it out. And the Warriors cannot be this 2 over, 4 under, 500 like that.
The Giants.
They can't be the Giants until January. And then they figure, we got to put it in gear like that, and figure out who actually needs to play and the right combinations and all that. So again, you can make the case on paper that they're better. I don't think it translates, especially without a clear-cut number 2, to more wins. And so I think they're anywhere between everything goes right, they're a 7. Everything goes wrong, they're like a 12 to 15 in the Western Conference, depending upon the level of go wrong as it relates to number 30, Stephen Curry.
I'm going to send you the clip of my mini rants on the Warriors because I did encapsulate a good chunk of what you said, with a big part of that being you can't wait until February to figure out the right roles for everybody. And again, I do trust the ability of Steve Kerr to problem solve throughout the season, but I think it's completely fair to say it's taken way too long to figure out the right combinations. And frankly, like the combinations talk in the lineup, I understand that there is truth to that, but fans don't want to be hearing that when your team is 15 and 18 in the first couple months of the season.
You got to win. If you got to be winning enough. Like it's the difference between being 17 and 13, 30 games in, and being 14 and 16 or 13 and 7. Like it's a subtle, we're talking about a 2 or a 3 game difference, but a 2 or a 3 game difference makes all the difference in terms of how everybody feels about everything. Greg, I want to touch quickly on just the roster as is. I started to do that. We kind of got off on a little mini tangent. I think the biggest question, if the Warriors are not going to look to do something big, and I think they're pretty much blocked out right now, barring the unforeseen, as to a big move that they can make right now. We'll get into that in a second, but I think let's just for the sake of discussion, hey, this is the team. The first big question they're going to have is what do they do with Kuminga, Draymond, and Trace Jackson Davis? Like that. Like I think Podziemski's in line to start. I think
you would think.
I think Podziemski's in line to you can't think as highly of Podziemski as you think of him and then not start him. I actually think you can say the same thing about Kuminga. Like, and I will say this: I think Kuminga as a regular season player can help you win games playing the 4. I think for as highly as they speak of Kuminga, he should start at the 4. And Draymond should start at the 5, and TJD should come off the bench as the backup 5. And Podziemski had start at the 2 with Wiggins at the 3. Again, we're assuming that this is the roster. Obviously, Steph at the 1. And then, Podziemski becomes, I think, the backup 1. You've got Melton in that backup mix. You've got Buddy Hield in the backup guard / small forward mix. You've got Moody. You've got Kyle Anderson, TJD. You figure out Looney and Peyton if those guys are still around and kind of go from there. But to me, you can't, on the one hand say, yeah, Kuminga's the number 2 scorer and we think highly of him. And then also say, well, wait a minute. I think they've got a major problem if they say we want to get TJD out there for his defense with Draymond and Wiggins, and now Kuminga is going to be shifted to be a bench player at the beginning of the year. I think run the risk of really pissing off and kind of losing Kuminga again after you've gassed him up and basically, told him that he's part of the future because of the fact that he's still around.
I mean, look, this is where I'm at with Kuminga heading into this season because, believe it or not, I do like a good chunk of aspects of Kuminga's game. I know. I'm going to get a bunch of heat for that one too, as will you. But you're absolutely right in that, sure, if Kuminga is a liability out there after a chunk of time and he hasn't taken the leap that they hoped for him to take into this next season, then you can adjust the lineup. If he's becoming a problem on the court and not delivering expectations, you can cross that bridge when you get to it. But you gotta head into the season and give the guy a chance. Give him some runway to get in a starting role to be the number 2 scorer.
At the 4.
Again, not going to open that can of worms. We've hammered that one into the ground. But you got to give Kuminga a chance to flourish into this number 2 role. If you've shown how you valued him and Podziemski in this offseason, you got to put them in roles to at least try to deliver on that front.
Yeah, no question. So I think that's the way I would do it as it stands right now. Again, I think that also relates to, where and kind of leads to the path of where do they go from here. The one thing about Lauri Markkanen had that come to fruition, and we were all over this. And again, I won't let a podcast go by where I talk about Kuminga at the 4 versus Kuminga at the 3. But Lauri Markkanen would have allowed for Kuminga maybe to play the 3 because of his skill set. That player isn't on the Warriors roster. So, and again, if Kuminga is going to be a productive player, if he is going to be somebody that you're going to pay upward of $150 to $170 million in terms of a contract, then he has to be able to flourish at the position where he's had his only success to this point in his NBA career, which is at the power forward spot. And honestly, you got to factor that in if you're going to, look to keep him around, how it works with Draymond and how it works with Trayce Jackson-Davis. I don't think that's actually a big deal. Like, I think there's plenty of minutes, even if you start Draymond at the 5, I think there's still plenty of minutes for Draymond and TJD, for TJD and Kuminga. Like, I think those combinations work for, Kyle Anderson to get in the mix there. Like, I don't think, but to me, you should start Kuminga at the 4 as it's currently constituted, Wiggins at the 3. Now, that, I think, starts the chat to go down to, all right, what do the Warriors potentially look to do if they're looking to do something else, and names to watch. So here's where I believe the Warriors are. I think the Warriors believe they are set up and have enough good players and movable assets. And we've shown a willingness of them to include some picks, right? We've seen that. We've seen their willingness via some of the reporting to include some picks. I think the Warriors believe they're set up to make a move if they don't panic. And I think that's the key for me, is as much as I don't think the on paper they might be better as they're currently constituted is real, I also don't think they should panic into making a move just to make a move, because I think that could potentially make them worse, i.e., still got to just move off of Wiggins, just for the hell of it. Let's get into some specific names that were mentioned by The Athletic. And this was in the Shams deal. Jeremy Grant, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Bojan Bogdanovic, Malcolm Brogdon. Those were some of the names that were mentioned. A couple of the names that were mentioned that the Warriors do not have interest in, Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram. So, again, where I stand. I would not do Wiggins plus salary fillers for Zach LaVine. I think Ingram is interesting, but what do you truly get? You're going to give up Wiggins. And I don't think a team that's looking to get off of Ingram and the Pelicans, I don't think is taking Wiggins back with more years left on the deal. But part of the reason they're trying to get off of Ingram is they're done with him and don't want to sign him long term. So and I don't think the Warriors at this point would look to want to sign Ingram long term. So no to Levine, no to Wiggins. I mean, what? I don't. I mean, they'd be talking Wiggins for Jeremy Grant.
Apparently, Joe Cronin asked for 2 firsts for Jeremy Grant when he paid a first to get him and then signed him to a massive deal. So like that math to me, I was like, okay.
Yeah, good luck. Like I don't know. I don't love a lot of, like, I don't like Jeremy Grant. I don't think, like, Wiggins for Jeremy Grant. I mean, again, and obviously you'd have to add more to that because Wiggins is making less than Jeremy Grant is moving forward.
I mean, it is more shooting.
So, but again, you're adding him and putting him where? You're putting him, like, how does he work with Kuminga? Like, I don't know. I don't see that fit. Cam Johnson's interesting. I think he's a bench guy. Dorian Finney-Smith is a nice bench guy. Bojan Bogdanovic, interesting. And again, I don't know. I view a couple of those. I look at Bojan Bogdanovic and Cam Johnson as potential. Like, would you trade Wiggins for some shooting and then maybe look to play that player with Kuminga and have it potentially free up Kuminga and maybe provide better balance? What do you think of some of those names? Again, if you do add legitimate shooting, in fairness, that does open, I think, more flexibility positionally for Kuminga. That's a fair and real point.
Yes. It's tough with the Wiggins because what we've seen over the last 2 years is a complete lack of consistency, lack of aggressiveness on offense, not very effective shooting from the perimeter. But when he's been locked in, which, to be completely fair, has not been a large chunk of the time, he has been the best perimeter defender at the highest rate of minutes for the Warriors. And so if you're going to trade him to get some shooting, I guess I just ask how you fill that hole out on the perimeter, or is it worth the risk? I think that kind of needs to be assessed. And, I hate to give kind of a non-answer here, but I got to see how this first bit of the season with this lineup even goes, because it could be pretty quick of me hitting that red panic button and saying, yeah, they got to get some shooting and you can get off of Wiggins. Could also very much go the other way. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think I think you made the point that's the most important one as it relates to Wiggins, which is the defense. I mean, the Warriors still want to be a really good defensive player, or I'm sorry, defensive team, and Wiggins is their best point of attack defender among those that are still, young and athletic, and they just don't have anybody else that can answer that bell. And again, I know Kuminga's name gets mentioned, but I don't frankly want to put that on Kuminga when you're also potentially going to be asking Kuminga to be your number 2 scorer. Like, I think that's a lot of weight to ask him to carry as it relates to this thing. I'm looking at some of the contracts here. Dorian Finney-Smith, $14.9 million for this year, $15.3 million for next year. That's a player option, so I think he would at this point be opting in on that, although we'll see. And then you've got Jeremy Grant. I mean, Jeremy Grant has 4 more years on his deal, closer to Wiggins money than I thought for next year, 29.7, then 32, 34.2, and he has a player option for 36.4 for the 27-28 year. So under contract for 3 more, potentially 4 more.
You trade GP2 back to Portland.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that would be Wiggins and somebody, obviously, for Jeremy Grant. But again, if the Blazers are asking for multiple first-round picks attached to that, that is in theory, though, I will say, your problem for our problem kind of a framework, right? Like the Blazers are kind of done with Jeremy Grant, or would like to get off of him, but then the Warriors maybe would want to change the scenery type of a deal for Wiggins. So I could kind of see that. I don't know about the fit though with him and Kuminga on the front line. And then, yeah, you'd have to throw somebody else in that deal as well. But again, if Portland really truly wants multiple firsts, then I mean, forget about that. I mean, to me, I wouldn't give up a single first. To be honest, like to me, that's a straight your problem for my problem kind of a deal if Wiggins is in that one.
Yeah, and I feel like knowing Joe Cronin and his asking prices, that's also not a very likely deal to get done unless something were to change. So,
yeah, Bogdanovich, Bojan Bogdanovich, $19 million for one more year left on his deal. So $19 million, one more year left on his deal. He went to Brooklyn, right? In the
New York.
Did he go to New York? I thought he went to Brooklyn though, right?
I thought he was one of the 6 Knicks players to get injured and be out for the season.
Yeah, no, he was on the Knicks, but I thought he went in the Mikal Bridges
in the
trade.
offseason. Oh, yeah. yes. I kind of forgot about the Mikal Bridges trade.
Yeah, no, he went. Yeah. No, he was on the Knicks. Yes, he was on the Knicks at the end of the season.
Very, very briefly.
Yeah, but he was in the Mikal Bridges trade. So with Bridges going from the Nets to the Knicks, so yeah, $19 million for him. Again, is he a starter at this point? I don't really think he's a starter at this point. I don't know. What do you think of Bojan Bogdanovich
on this team as a starter? I mean, he can't shoot. Again, it's another.
Shoot. Yeah. Again, that's probably
an
Wiggins.
Offensive centric lineup. Yeah. If you want to go offense heavy, you could probably go Bogdanovich at the 3 with Kuminga, Draymond /TJD, Steph, and one of the guards.
Okay. I think that's okay. We'll file that away. I don't know. I think his days of being a starter, and again, if you're the Warriors, are you going to be good enough defensively if you're going to, have him, in that spot? I don't know if that would necessarily work out. I'm looking for Cam Johnson's contract here. Let's see. Cam Johnson, he signed a big deal, but Cam Johnson 23-6 and then 21-5, 23-6 is the way it's structured for Cam Johnson. And then he's a free agent in 2027. So interesting there on Cam Johnson. He would be a Wiggins. Obviously, that would be a your problem for my problem kind of a thing with Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah, Wiggins on the tanking Nets would. I'd feel a little bit bad for him. I'm not going to lie.
Well, and again, it makes you wonder, how, and I think we're going to see here, Greg, what how done with Wiggins the Warriors truly are, because I think their focus on Markkanen was holding up any other potential things that they might look to do. And now, obviously, with Markkanen remaining with the Jazz, we're going to find out. I know the speculation and the reporting has been that the Warriors are going to look for some small upgrades. I know they've loved Brogdon forever. They were going to pick Brogdon going back to the year he was drafted before they got jumped in line by Milwaukee, I think it was.
Yeah, Malcolm Brogdon, Rookie of the Year. And
so the Warriors loved him. And he's had injuries and become less effective. I've always liked Brogdon as a player, but I think he's been too injured and too unproductive. And at this point, he's a guard. He's another guard. And I think the Warriors have enough guards at this point. So I'd be out on Malcolm Brogdon at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought he was a smart player, and I like that. But, as you saw with Chris Paul last year, just being a player who knows the game alone doesn't do a whole lot if the rest of your roster's not quite there.
Yeah. So I do think there are some intriguing options, maybe more intriguing than met the, first eye, as far as, again, I don't see Jeremy Grant as a realistic deal. I think Cam Johnson and Bojan Bogdanovich are interesting in terms of if you're looking to maybe add some shooting, and if you really are hell-bent on getting off of Wiggins. The other part of it is, could you figure out a way to maybe get one of those type players, whether it's Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson or Bojan Bogdanovich, without giving up Wiggins? Like, could you put Moody and Payton in a deal combined, or Moody and Looney in a deal combined to maybe get to that level. So I know we talked about Wiggins, but there's also a world where maybe you just add another wing that can shoot, and that just becomes more depth, and you're also finding a home maybe for a player that wouldn't fit in your rotation now to get somebody that you would project to fit in your rotation. So final thoughts on that, and anything else here before we wrap it up?
Trades are hard.
It's exhausting. This whole thing.
It is.
Yeah, Greg, good stuff, man. We'll end it on that note. Great to be back with you. And look for this podcast as news breaks. We'll try and do it pretty regularly here. It does get into August and September. It kind of gets into a little bit of a dead period. So I would say, look for it every week to 10 days, hopefully. We took a little break, with this Niners training camp heavy and the Giants, getting hot so they could get back to 500. But we'll get back into the Dubs routine, little snack size bites before we get into the real thing. Definitely smaller bites as news breaks. Although we always say that, and it always ends up at least 45 minutes. So we just get together and start yapping, Greg. That doesn't even count the off-air shows. I know. We did like a 30-minute off-air show before this one. So for Greg, I'm JD. Make sure you're checking us out on all the KNBR socials. Like and subscribe and all that stuff. We'll put this up on YouTube as well if you want to watch it as opposed to listen to it. So yeah, we appreciate everybody. We'll talk to you soon right here for KNBR, the sports leader.